well, people would stop having large groups watching football games and house parties, the spread wouldn't be so bad.
Spreading rapidly everywhere.
We're heading towards the cliff. I don't know if the vaccine gets to us before we have horrible things.
Well, you can get ready for a national lockdown. And I'm wondering just how many businesses will go under. Small business. I'm not talking about corporations like Walmart and Target and the grocery store chains. I'm talking about the small businesses. Little neighborhood shops. They get shut down, they can't make money. They ain't gonna be able to pay their bills. And the Democrats have taken it upon themselves to refuse to let any money be released for unemployment and stimulus package. They're the ones holding it back. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. See, so what is there to stop them from doing this? Nothing. They're doing it to spite everybody. And they shouldn't.
The ability of the Biden administration to take over on January 20th in dealing with the COVID pandemic?
Well, it's very important, Chris, for the transition to be able to talk to the existing administration. And the reason is that there are thousands and thousands of career civil servants, political appointees who have been working very hard on this pandemic for many months now. They have plans that are in process. They have data that they've collected that the public doesn't always have access to. And to be able to see that data, see those plans, is what's going to help us put together the best possible product in the end. So those dialogues are critical. You want to get them started as soon as possible. And there's a lot of work for us to do now still, even though we don't have access to the departments, but we're going to need that as soon as possible.
We can pay people to lose their jobs. We can pay small business. We can take care of city, state, and county governments. This administration will not be going to a lockdown. Hopefully the whatever happens in the future, who knows which administration it will be. I guess time will tell. But I can tell you this administration will not go to a lockdown.
Now, President-elect Biden says he's not thinking of a national lockdown. One of your colleagues on the task force said this weekend you're thinking not of an on-off switch, but more of a dimmer. Having said that, the governor of New Mexico just issued a 2-week stay-at-home measure. The governor of Oregon is talking about a partial 2-week lockdown. Can you honestly say, if things get bad enough, aren't we going to need a national lockdown?
Well, that's a measure of last resort, Chris, and I'm glad you raised this because the way we think about lockdowns, I think, is different now than it was in the spring. In the spring, when we didn't know a lot about COVID, we responded, in a sense, with an on-off switch. We just shut things down because we didn't know exactly how this was spreading and where it was spreading. We've learned a lot more since then that tells us that the better way to think about these safety restrictions is more as a dial that we turn up and down depending on severity. And that's really the key here, is applying these restrictions judiciously and precisely. If you look in New York City, for example, they're applying not broad restrictions everywhere, but looking at specific zip codes to see where the outbreak is severe. What we need, Chris, and the reason that you see so much variation in what states are doing is that we don't have a national alert system guided by the best possible evidence that can help states and localities determine when to dial up and down these restrictions.
So far, and by a comfortable electoral vote margin, the country is facing 2 interconnected crises. One, the President of the United States refuses to concede the election, claiming falsely that it was somehow stolen. His Attorney General is currently encouraging investigations into voter fraud, despite a lack of evidence that any exists. His Secretary of State is suggesting the president will be inaugurated for a second term. Perhaps he was kidding. The president has fired his defense secretary and is filling the Defense Department with loyalists, some of whom traffic in conspiracy theories. If this were happening anywhere else, our State Department would be issuing grim reports about the future of that country's democracy. But that country is this country. It's happening here. Making matters worse, the administration is refusing to allow Biden's team access to secure communications and classified briefings, including Operation Warp Speed, which covers vaccine distribution for the exploding COVID crisis. And in fact, this is happening as President Trump is all but ignoring the pandemic, reportedly not having even met with his own coronavirus task force in at least 5 months. The pandemic, the highest case counts nationwide. In short, President Trump is refusing to acknowledge two realities: his defeat and COVID-19. But the virus does not care as it continues its march across the country, doing exactly what experts have long predicted it would do.
Whatever happens in the future, who knows which administration it will be? I guess time will tell. But I can tell you this administration will not go to a lockdown.
President Trump acknowledging for a moment on Friday that he may not have won the election, even as he continues to refuse to concede.
We're moving forward here at the White House under the assumption that there will be a second Trump term.
Mr. Trump out of public view for most of the week, but tweeting hundreds of times, suffered a string of legal setbacks in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Michigan on Friday, as Joe Biden's Electoral College win grew to 306 electoral votes, matching Mr. Trump's in 2016.
We had a massive landslide victory, as you know, in the Electoral College. I guess the final numbers are now at 306.
We are already beginning the transition. We're well underway.
President-elect Joe Biden, also largely out of public view, but criticizing the president, is considering one as well.
We haven't got our head in the game. We're running around like chickens with our heads cut off. Let's get serious.
As the coronavirus continues to spread.
I am announcing a 2-week freeze for the entire state.
Total lockdown if we don't start to get more serious and follow the rules.
You know what's really uncomfortable and annoying? When you die.
And as you can see by this chart, the number of new cases has skyrocketed, more than doubling in recent weeks. One person has been predicting this kind of turn in the pandemic since he first appeared to meet the press back on April 26th. Dr. Michael Osterholm said then we were in the foothills of this crisis and had mountains yet to climb. And if you could see that daily case count since the start of the pandemic, it looks like an ever-growing mountain. Dr. Osterholm is, of course, an infectious disease expert at the University of Minnesota, and he's now a member of President-elect Biden's COVID Advisory Board. Dr. Osterholm, welcome back to Meet the Press. I thought it was important to get your perspective first before I got to President-elect Biden's Chief of Staff, Ron Klain. So let me just simply ask you this. We're seeing the exponential rise that you sadly predicted would happen in COVID cases, you and many others.
I mean, we need action during the lame duck. There's a lot of things that are going to have to wait until Joe Biden is president, but this is not one of them. Getting help to people, getting help to state and local governments. I mean, it's not, we need urgent help to individuals, but we're going to see layoffs of police, of firefighters, of teachers in the next month in a lot of states and localities unless these local governments get the aid they need. I know that Speaker Pelosi is committed to that. I know Leader Schumer is committed to that. This shouldn't be partisan. By the way, these layoffs are coming not just in so-called blue states, but red states also. This is a national crisis. It needs bipartisan national action now.
Has the president-elect spoken with Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell yet about this issue or any issue?
He has not spoken with Senator McConnell about anything yet. We're hoping that Senator McConnell will accept the reality that is just the reality. Joe Biden won this election. Kamala Harris won this election. And I think it's time for leaders in both parties to get to business of this transition, to get to business of working together to start to plan out a legislative agenda for next year.
You said it's urgent for Congress to act in the lame duck, and are we to read in between the lines that you're telling Speaker Pelosi, look, don't stick to your guns completely, compromise where you have to? Is that the message that you wanted her to hear?
What I want, Speaker Pelosi has done a magnificent job of handling this. What I want her to hear is that we have her back in handling this, but we have the backs of the American people. Speaker Pelosi, by the way, was in long negotiations with Secretary Mnuchin to try to find that compromise. I mean, Chuck, it's not that she hasn't been at the table. She's been at the table. We just now see the current administration has walked away from the table. So our message to Speaker Pelosi is keep doing what you're doing. to the Republicans, let's get this done. I mean, this could be a first example of bipartisan action.
4% to 20% of the Latino vote. That did not exist even 10 years ago. But the challenge is that you have to be able to invest in that. The reason Arizona flipped, Georgia is on the line, and North Carolina is that you have wonderful grassroots organizers that are there year round. The Democratic Party, when they start seeing fault lines in Florida, we flagged, but people didn't realize that Trump never stopped talking to the Latino community in Florida. There was a real apparatus of misinformation and disinformation. And when we talk about, well, why was that not caught on a broader level, Facebook did a fantastic job of catching it for the most part in English, but not in Spanish.
Yeah.
So this is an opportunity for us to say, well, how do we take a step back and how do we communicate with the Latino community continuously? But even in Texas is interesting because even though it didn't flip, first of all, it's not supposed to, but even though it didn't flip, you had a 600% increase in Latino youth vote from 2016. But you can't pack your bags after an election and expect people to come back. You need to continuously talk to people. You need to create investment, and you need to run candidates.
Al Cardenas, I'm going to put up what Maria Teresa was just talking about, the Spanish language, targeted advertising, misinformation. They are showing smiling faces of Maduro and Joe Biden together, which took place at the inauguration of a previous president of Brazil. And the numbers in Miami-Dade County, I mean, 200,000 of Donald Trump's 330,000 vote margin statewide came out of his improvement in Miami-Dade County, where he lost it by 30 points in 16, only 7 points now. How much was that disinformation impactful on Joe Biden now?
Well, look, I think there's some reasons to give the Trump campaign some kudos there. Jeffrey's colleague, Ann Applebaum, wrote a book recently about the seduction of authoritarianism. And frankly, the Trump cult really hit hard on the Hispanic community there. Most people came as exiles from countries that were used to authoritarian figures. The second thing is the socialism stuck hard, and the Democrats never fought back. And Trump had a 4-year investment in Miami. That's 3.1% of the total Hispanic vote, and it was very peculiar, and it hit hard. It was probably half of a winning margin in Florida for Donald Trump. But, you know, taking on a little bit of Jennifer's article, there are 15 million Hispanics, more or less, who voted, and about 30% voted for Donald Trump. Historically, over the last 7 or 8 presidential elections, you know, the margins have been between 25 and 40% for Republicans. So he was kind of on the lower side. Yeah. The net gain for Biden was 6.5 million voters in the Hispanic community. And frankly, he won by 5 million votes. So if you're a Latino or
he tweeted, "The only problem, he passed away 14 years ago. Sadly, Mr. Blaylock is a victim of voter fraud." That claim was amplified on national television.
And no one quite embodies that story like James Blaylock of Covington, Georgia. Mr. Blaylock was a mailman for 33 years until he passed away in 2006. 14 years later, according to state records, he was still mailing things. James Blaylock cast a ballot in last week's election.
False. James Blaylock did not vote in last week's election. Mrs. James Blaylock voted in last week's election.
He's not voted. He didn't vote.
It was you.
It was me.
Agnes Blaylock voted using her married name, Newton County confirmed. Her voter registration was signed as Mrs. James E. Blaylock Jr., and that's exactly how she signed her name when she voted in the November 3rd general election.
The President of the United States was accusing you of voter fraud.
Essentially.
Oh, I know it. And I knew it wasn't fraud.
Is there anything you'd like people to know about your husband? Because I'm sure he's dearly missed.
Best man I ever knew. Best one to me. I couldn't have had a better one.
And his was his wife who voted. She voted as Mrs. James Blaylock. It's old-fashioned, and we missed it. And a whole bunch of dead people did vote. We showed you their names. We proved it. But James Blaylock was not among them. It was Mrs. James Blaylock. So apologies for that. And of course, we're always going to correct when we're wrong, and we were.
Yes. Steph seldom.
And cars are cars. And parts for parts. Love these old cars. They don't make them like this anymore.
I want my chicken fried with